Hey, Composing Gloves here, and today we're going to be looking at the dynamics module inside of Isotope's Trash 2. Now, this is going to be quite a hefty thing to dissect and look at, and I am going to attempt to do it all in this one video. So if you're more advanced and you just need to know what buttons do and some of the workflow things that go on, I will show you those things. If you are not, go check out my What is Compression video, and I have a couple other ones. I'll try to remember to put them down in the description. So they should be down there, and you can go and look at them. And it'd be really cool if I could like pull out of my video and point at the actual link. But anyways, make sure that you know what compression is and gating is. And I will be covering them, but in like brief sentences, just like brief recap of what they do. Just so that if you are stubborn, you still won't get totally lost. Okay, so what I have here is I have a dynamics, I have a signal. It sounds like this. Right now, nothing's happening. Why is nothing happening? Well, I want to show you what this thing can do. So in multiband mode, it's a multiband compression. You see we have a threshold compressor, a gate, a graphic display, some meters. Well, these aren't meters. These are some gain control, mix control, and an audio gain button, which is very handy. And we can individually adjust these, and we can also set individual side chains for the different bands. And there's even a fourth band, and we've covered this, but you can insert a band. We cover that in the other multiband option, the trash module. We talk about that in the trash module when you enter multiband mode there. So I'm going to leave that one alone, but it's pretty straightforward. You right click and you have this list of options. It pretty much does what you think it does. Okay, so let's get started. First, I'll give you a little demo. So we have our signal, and when I push a button on my keyboard, I'm sending something through the side chain to trash 2, telling things to turn on and behave a certain way. So when I play it, this is what we got. So that drastic change happened when I hit my button on the keyboard. When I hit a key and a note sending a signal into trash 2 telling it, hey, turn on these processes. That happened. That's called side chaining. Now, I didn't do this to taste. I just did this to make some sort of an example to show you the differences. Now, really quick, before we get into this, in order for me to enable the side chaining for trash 2, you have to load the VST3 version. And what you do is you go into this cog menu, you go to processing, and you see you just click auto map inputs. Make sure that NFL, you've mapped it. So right here, you see I've got it mapped. What am I sending? I'm sending one of these. See, I have this, and it's going to trash 2. It's going in that same channel, so trash 2 can see that as an input. And that's what it sets as the input. So that's how you set up the side chaining in FL Studios. And other DAWs, it's a little more straightforward than this, but that's how you do it in FL. Okay, so just the thing, yeah, VST3 is a requirement for this particular circumstance. All right, now let's talk about how this thing works. So first up, you have these meters. Let's get out of multi-band mode. Let's look at just one band. So our entire spectrum is being controlled by one band. And let's turn off sidechain. Okay, so over here, we've got our envelope. This thing shows us our compressor in action. So you see this red line is the actual gain reduction. So you see our compressor is turning on, and it shows us that. If it goes above this line, which you can see is 0, if you can see that, you know it's going to be expanding. And if I scroll my mouse wheel, we can change this scale, which is kind of a handy-dandy scale. If for whatever reason you need to see a little bit closer, maybe you're limiting things pretty hard, and you need to zoom in a little bit. Okay, we can turn our gain. We can turn that off if you do not want to see the red line, but I prefer to see the red line. Over here is our multi-band control. If we turn it on, multi-band, this button right here, we can change it, and by clicking on the different bands, we can see what they're doing. So yeah, so those are the bands, pretty straightforward. If you want to see them all at the same time, you can hit all, and you can see the settings for band 1, band 2, band 3, and you also can insert a band for band 4 if you so desire. I'm going to remove that band. So there's 3 bands. And I prefer to work inside this. So again, that's controlled by the multi-band module. So you switch between the bands, or you can just click on the bands. I like this because you can see the graph. It's a little more straightforward. You have this link button. This links controls. So when you make adjustments in one band, it'll link them in the other bands. I don't touch that very often, but maybe that's an important thing for something you want to do. So anyways, yeah, you could solo bands and bypass bands. And you may consider, like, maybe that's something you want to do. It's an integral part of your sound or whatever. Maybe you just want to turn a particular band off, filter out some frequencies, and you'd rather do it using the dynamics module than the actual filter module. Like, hey, you know, more power to you. We have a detection filter. Now, in a compressor or a gate or whatever, there's got to be some way for the thing to know when to activate. Because a compressor, once it passes the threshold, or maybe it's below the threshold, something about the threshold is going to tell the compressor to turn on or off or behave a different way. And the same thing goes for the gate. And so you want to be able to tell that. Now, if you're sending a mix through here, or you're sending just a track, maybe it's got some drums on it, but you also, I don't know, maybe you've got some sort of an issue with some frequencies triggering the compressor, but you want to stay in just like one band. You don't want to go into multi-band mode. You want one band. Well, you can solo your input so you can see what the detection filter is looking at to tell your stuff to turn on or turn off, or do whatever it's going to do. So you can actually solo that. And a cool thing is you can turn on the detection filter by clicking on this button, and then you can actually filter out stuff that might be triggering these modules to turn on, and you don't want them to do that. So you can change that, and that allows you some pretty extreme control. That way, if let's say that kick is triggering it, well, you can just filter out the kick, and then you're done. You don't need to do a sidechain thing like that. Now, I also have a sidechain input, though. So if I turn on my sidechain, I can actually solo my sidechain. So that's what I'm actually sending into trash 2. When I turn it off, you see that right now it's not there, but if you turn on something, you can see that it's coming in. Trash 2 sees it. And again, that's because I'm using the VST3 version. So that's the detection filter. Pretty straightforward. That tells your stuff when to turn on and when to not turn on. Okay, so let's go over to the main band. So this red band, of course, represents what the module's actually doing. So how fast, if it's applying gain reduction, things of that nature. We have a compressor. You could set the threshold over here, and you see we have a compression and a gate. And right now, if I turn the sidechain mode off on my gate and turn my gate essentially off, you see that it returns to its value, and there's no gain reduction being applied right there. There's no gate. But as soon as I turn it on, there is a gate. And the way a gate works is if a signal is below the threshold, which in this case, there's no signal, it's going to be applying gain reduction. As soon as the signal passes the threshold, the gate opens up and allows the signal to go through. The compressor works a little bit differently. Remember, a compressor works, there's a threshold, and then when the signal passes the threshold, the compressor is going to turn down that signal by some set amount. So for every 4 decibels it passes the threshold, it's going to only let 1 decibel go through. So that's at a ratio of 4:1. You can see our ratio that we set right here. Obviously, more extreme ratios are officially, once you reach the ratio of 10:1, you are officially limiting. That's the standard ratio that people have agreed that you're now limiting, meaning the chances of something for every 10 decibels it goes above the threshold, only one's going to come out, meaning you're trying to stop signal from going past that level. And we have things called look-ahead limiters, which can actually even look ahead. That way they can turn down the signal or respond before the signal even gets there, so that nothing gets past this threshold. And that's what a look-ahead limiter does. This guy we say a ratio of like 4:1 or whatever, but it's going to wait 500 milliseconds before it turns on its full attenuation. So if you've told it, turn it down by 4 decibels, blah, 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 and your threshold's right here, when the signal goes past it, it's going to take this amount of time to begin to make that change. Then when the signal goes back down, that gain reduction is still applied. Even though it's gone below the threshold, that's what your release is for. So as your release is turned up, it will take longer for that gain reduction to come back. So you can get this pumping sound. Even though signal goes below the threshold, it takes a while for the compressor to release its grip. If you have a very fast release time and attack time, it's going to be releasing and grabbing very rapidly, so fast that it's actually going to change your waveform and add distortion. If we play this. And I turned off my, let me adjust this here. So we're going to go here. We're going to do this. You also have this auto gain option. That's where I'm going to start taking advantage of this right now. Auto gain, what it does, as you can see, as the pop-up says, is if you have some sort of change in gain, we are often fooled that loud things sound better. So what this does is it automatically adjusts the gain for you so that you are not fooled by these gain adjustments. You're paying attention to timbre changes. What is this compressor actually doing to your signal? Not, is it making it sound louder or softer? So you can focus on those sorts of things. There are pros and cons to using both in both sets. Right now I'm going to turn it on though for this. So right now my attack and release are like super fast. And now you can hear that distortion. You can see it in the middle too. And now if I take the attack and turn it up to be much slower, You can see that it takes time for it to turn on. You can even see quite visually how it's responding. So yes, and then you can see our release is mega fast. So typically attacks will be, depending on their source material, if you want your transients to get through, you'll have a slow attack and maybe a faster release. Maybe not 1 millisecond. That's pretty intense. But you know, you'll adjust it according to your material. Maybe you're trying to catch the transients and take those down, so you'll have a faster attack and maybe a slower release, because as this material gets longer after the initial hit, this is useful for a voice. You might have like a medium release time and a reasonably fast attack time, just to reduce those transients. And we can get into a bunch of like psychoacoustics on what we think sounds louder, what we think sounds better, that kind of a thing. You can also change the way your compressor responds, whether or not it's responding to a peak input or an RMS. So an RMS is the average loudness. And if we take a look at the meters here, we have something that's pretty loud most of the time. If we go into peak, it's going to read reasonably the same, because we hit a level and then we stay at that level. You see our peak actually goes a little bit higher though. So if we had some source material that had a lot of peaks and we wanted it to sound generally louder, it'd be wiser to put it on the RMS value, the root mean square value. And that will look at it more generally. It won't look at the peak. So when it spikes, it won't respond to that. It will only respond to the longer things, so we can compress it using those values. That's better for general loudness. If you're trying to tame some intense peaks or whatever though, you're going to want to use the peak setting. So, okay. So this sets the threshold of the compressor when the compressor turns on. So you see, it looks at like, oh, if the signal goes past here, and we can see that it most certainly does, then it will begin to apply its effect. And this red represents the compression or the gating or whatever that's taking place, the amount of reduction. We have a number down here representing that. And then over here we have the gate. You notice the gate can never go above the threshold of the compressor. And what the gate does is it says when signal is above this, turn on. And so it would be a little weird to have it above the threshold of the compressor. So anyways, what we're going to do now is we are going to look at the sidechain option. Now, I've already explained how to get the sidechain in here, and I've shown you what I'm using and how the detection filter works for that. So what happens is you turn on the sidechain, and that means that when signal comes in to the gate, or we're looking at the sidechain on the compressor. My bad. I don't know why I'm explaining the gate right now. When I have something come in, it's not going to look at the actual signal now to determine when the compressor should turn on or when the compressor should turn off. It's going to ignore that. Now it's going to look specifically at my sidechain input. And then according to the things I've set here, if my sidechain input passes this threshold, it will therefore turn on this and act upon the signal that's coming into trash 2. The sidechain input only determines whether or not it turns on or off. So right now, if I turn it on, you can see what's going on. Now, so I'm going to hit it kind of hard now. I'm going to hit it kind of soft. It's kind of hard to hit it that soft. Very soft. Let me raise this up a little bit. Okay, so if I hit it hard, there you go. It's going to turn on like that. But if I hit it softer, you see that it does not nearly, it's very, very different. It does not trigger the compressor. You see when I hit it hard, it triggers the compressor more because more of it's going through, so it applies more gain reduction. So that's pretty much the gist of a sidechain input. We have the same for a gate, and it works on the exact same principle. We use that to trigger it rather than the actual audio itself. If we wanted to, though, we could filter the audio and have it trigger it itself. I'm going to stick to sidechain for now. I think it's kind of a little more, it's easier for me to mess with. And so with the sidechain, now with the gate, of course, when a signal passes the threshold. Now you notice that we have a ratio here. We can tell the gate how much gain reduction to apply by the ratio. And the idea here is that basically it shuts down the signal. So if you have some like annoying noise on one of your bands, like say you've got some hanging out, and let's say it's a little bit higher in frequency, so like something like that, then you could probably get at that just by setting a multiband compressor and gating the high frequencies. And that will allow you to, so that when signal comes through, you'll hear the sound, but as soon as it goes below that value, and you can set an attack and a release value for this as well. You notice we also have this knee setting, and if I change it here, you can see that this rounds out right here. or if I make it hard. This changes just the way that it deals with once it reaches that threshold, how it responds to that. This soft is a little less colored, hard is a little more colored, but they're both colored and they're colored in different ways. This is something that you can mess with. It usually, sometimes it can make a big difference, sometimes it doesn't. It also will make a larger difference if it's earlier in a signal chain, because if it's going through a bunch of stuff, obviously small changes at the beginning could yield very large changes down the line. So sometimes they're a little easier to be heard like that. So okay, so let's look at this. So you see my gate's on right now. There's no signal, but as soon as I hit it, the gate opens because I am sending signal that goes past the gate's threshold and it opens up. And it also applies on a ratio setting. I also have ratios that are actually bigger than 1. This is upwards compression. So I can do this so that I don't like upwards compression because of what it does to high frequencies a lot of the time. I prefer expansion. But if I turn it on, you notice that now when signal is below the threshold, it'll actually turn it up according to our ratio. And so that could be useful or not useful. And you can combine these things in interesting ways, and you can really twist your mind with what you're trying to do. Most of the time when people grab modules like this, you make a bunch of straightforward moves, and down the line, you can confuse yourself pretty easily. Just if you have a bunch of stuff going on, it can get a little confusing. I prefer to use dynamic equalizers for this, but the reason I'm not a big fan of upwards compression is because at the beginning of a compression envelope, when this stuff tends to turn on, high frequencies will be emphasized in a way I'm not that big of a fan of. If you turn on TDR Nova, for example, this is a free multiband dynamic equalizer, not a multiband compressor. So like I can set thresholds by turning these down and then ratios so that only these frequencies are responded. But if you get the gentleman's edition of this, and I have other isotope plugs that actually do this, so I don't have the gentleman's edition of this, but if you can turn the ratio actually be smaller than 1, and that way it will expand those frequencies specifically. You can be very specific about it versus an upwards compression. You can't be specific like that. Now, this is a multi-band compressor, though. And so some of you guys are going, you can do that on specific bands. And that's true, but the way it behaves is still a little different just because of the nature of how the envelope is introduced. And it uses a compression envelope to do it rather. This uses a compression envelope as well, but the attack and release are a little bit different. So I prefer dynamic EQs. They're just a lot more straightforward, but you can achieve very similar results with a multiband compressor, just like this right here. And you'll see me pull out Maximus, which is a multiband compressor, and Maximus lets me draw in curves like this, though, something you can't do in Trash 2. You can do this. Hey, this beginning part of the envelope, the part that I don't like, I can just make that be linear and then do that. And that's really cool. That's power right there. They don't give you that much power, but they do give you a fair amount of power. Most plugins will generally do something like this. You can also grab these points and move them like so, and you see it adjust the controls for you if you want to adjust the threshold like this and like that. It's not like you just saw me messing with Maximus. Now, if I hit plus, I can zoom in and out on this thing if you so desire. And you can also zoom the scale in and out by scrolling your mouse wheel over here. I think I've already said that. Now that we've covered these settings, we can look at the actual bands. And you can see here that I can click on bands and change their settings. I can, again, go to the all page and see all of them all at once. I prefer to see the graph, though, just so I can see what I'm doing. And it's kind of cool to just come up here and click around. And that is that. You can get pretty complicated because now I could set like a sidechain here, but not over here. And I could do something down here that's different than over here. And that's really powerful to be able to say, hey, treat these frequencies different than those. Super mega powerful. People are a little scared of this kind of stuff because it's like a lot less intuitive than just manipulating a graph like I showed you with the dynamic EQ. Maybe one day they'll include that inside, like maybe Trash 3 will have a dynamic EQ in it. I'm willing to bet it'll show up at some point. But it's very intuitive. I'm pretty used to working with these things at this point, and I have general ideas, and I understand like psychoacoustics and stuff like that, so I can make decisions that I can guess what the effects will be later on down the line when I apply more processing. Okay, so amongst all this madness of information, we have a couple more options. We have the gain, and you can apply this globally to all your bands, or you can apply this to just one band. So you can say one band or all the band, and you could apply the mix to one band or all the bands. So kind of a cool deal. And I've already explained the auto gain. And the reason why auto gain is so important, and if you actually pay attention on the TDR Nova, or if you've got good eyes, you can see there's an EQ gain here. So it's the same deal. And the reason is people will tend to boost things to find their sweet spots and stuff, when applying a cut to everything else will save you headroom and often achieve the same result. Here with compressors, we have a tendency when things get really loud, we tend to say, hey, I like the way that sounds, when in reality, we just turned the volume up, and maybe we did it in a way that we liked, but it's doing more damage in a lot of other ways. So by playing auto gain, we can hear just the changes in the actual sonic character of the sound without being fooled by volume changes. But volume changes also, they can play a role that auto gain can't always make up for. It's just something I've noticed when I'm working. And so I use this quite a bit, but I'm also sparing in it, especially if I'm going to be doing something here and then running it through like the wave shaper. If I'm going to run it through the wave shaper after gain changes and dynamic changes like this becomes much more of a tonal process than it does a like adjusting for the mix process. I might be trying to get frequencies back by compressing mega hard or upwards expanding mega hard or doing something really weird. And so in that case, the role that this plays changes quite substantially. So that's that. I hope this made sense to you. If you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe, support me on Patreon, and have a blessed day.